Right, good evening everyone, welcome. Hello. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for the third year of the World of Work Week. And we're delighted that this is the first time we've actually been in person following COVID and all the rest of it. So it's great to see all your faces in the room. We've got a lot of people that have joined us online, so that's also very exciting. We are going to start with our guests from SAGIA and then go over to the folks from iSprout. But first and foremost, thank you for taking the time. Thank you for signing up online. I think this is a really valuable step in the direction for your next chapter, whether it's next year, in 5 months' time, can you believe it? Or in a few years' time. It's great that you're thinking about it and that you're taking active steps towards what you need to do for your career one day. So I'd like to start off with welcoming Nicole Peterson, who is the Program Manager for SAGIA, and SAGIA stands for the South African Graduate Employers Association. And so welcome, Nicole, thank you so much. And tell us a little bit about SAGIA first.
So hi everyone. So SAGIA has been around since 2004. Can I actually just bring up my slide?
Oh,
thank you. Easier to follow. And we are really dedicated to connecting and advancing graduate employment. So we have over 300 talent professionals that belong to SAGIA. And we also consist of 180 organizations, and I'll give you an example of those organizations on the next slide. So see if you recognize your future employer. So they are most likely all a member of South African Graduate Employers Association.
So what is it that students, future graduates, need to be thinking about now? What are the steps they've got to be processing for themselves?
So I think before I dig into our research, I do first want to start with the self. So let's have a look at some of the things to consider. So I think once you've probably gotten to the point of 21, 22, you might know yourself slightly better than what you knew yourself when you were 12 or 13. So you really need to think about what are the characteristics that make you unique, what are your strengths, what are the things that you bring to an organization and to the table. And the second one is around, which is really what we're going to be focusing around, is on the opportunity that's available based on what you've studied. In some instances, it's less about the degree and more about the skills that you bring, but it is very important that you understand in your context what are the opportunities that are available. So for the purpose of my presentation, we'll talk specifically about local, and then of course we've got Francois over here that will talk broader than the South African context. And the third one is really around aspiration. So we all have, specific goals, we've got dreams, we've got things we want to buy, we've got places we want to visit, we want, those sort of things, and what is it really that is going to fulfill your dream based on what you are good at and also what opportunities are available. And then also lastly, it's around using the information that you have, evaluating, knowing what you know about yourself and knowing what you know about the opportunities that are available. What is going to be your immediate step as you transition from university into the world of work?
Are you just going to flip through this?
Yeah.
Okay. So one thing that SAGIA does that is just the most amazing bit of information that we find in the employer space is they survey employers and they survey recent graduates to find out what is happening in the market right now. And I love going through this section in these presentations because it is the reality. It is the grounding yourself in what the actual status is right now for you young people going into the world of work. We're talking how many applications, how many positions, what the average or the median salary space looks like. And it's shocking, it's eye-opening, but it's so important because, you're talking about ambition in the self. A lot of people, you'll say, what is your ambition? Well, in 5 years' time, I want to be the CEO. Is that based in reality? It's a great dream to have, but what's the market doing can it facilitate that for you? And so I'm so excited about the next set of data that Nicole's going to go through for you, because it is that reality. It is fresh data. They do it every year. They released the survey results for 2022 about a month or so ago. And so it's really hot off the press and relevant to right now. So I hope you enjoy that. So Nicole, please share the wisdom.
So the initial part that I'll share with you is from an employer perspective, and we have over 100 of our partners who participate in the survey, so I think it's quite representative. And then the second part I'll talk to you about from a young graduate perspective, and again we have about 2,000 young graduates who have answered this. Okay, so that's just, the two surveys that we do. So like I said, from a candidate perspective and an employer perspective. So this one is always quite interesting for me because half of our employers, or the employers who responded to this, are looking for some sort of leadership capability. And how focused are we, I guess, at a tertiary level on our leadership capabilities? It's probably something that gets punted to us very much when we are in high school, but what opportunities do we have available while we are at university to actually grow these skills? So obviously some practical things would be, things like res mentors or O-week mentors, that sort of thing. But these are all things that can actually build that capability. And when I show you later on, you will realize why it's important for you to, if you look at your class size now, it could be 100, could be 200, could be 50, or if you were graduated prior to this, if you have the exact same things on your CV, what is actually going to make you stand out? And that's what we want to talk about. Okay. And then just from a vacancy perspective, so again, we work with median instead of averages, and I'm not going to try and explain that because I'm sure there's a few statisticians somewhere in the room or on the call, but yeah, we use median so that it's more accurate in terms of what we talk about versus average, which could then end up skewing the data or the answers. And then this also just gives you an overview of how the vacancies have changed over the last almost or just over 10 years. As you could see from, post-COVID, there was definitely a dip, but positively, it is definitely picking up. A nice spike last year, or at the beginning of last year, but I think that's also, we came through COVID, we remain positive as a nation, and I think that also has a positive impact on the amount of vacancies available. And then, projected for this year, sort of flattened out versus how it was over the last 5 years. So positive, there are still jobs available. So yeah, okay. And then just in terms of where, so in the main, it's still sitting pretty much in the accounting and professional services space. So if you are studying towards sort of CA qualification, then I think you'll be okay. And then also quite a chunk in financial services, and the rest is all pretty much spread between IT, consumer science, consulting, retailing, and engineering and manufacturing. What we've seen over the last while is definitely an increase more on the data science, big data, AI, new and emerging space. So also just if you are wanting to move into that space, that's definitely also quite positive. And then something that graduates always ask is, what can I expect? What does a good salary look like? If I'm earning 200,000 Rand a year, is that good? If I'm earning 500,000 Rand a year, is that good? So at the moment, the median is sitting at about 250,000. You can obviously divide that by 12 and see what you come home with. But there are a chunk of graduates that are earning very close to 500,000 as well. And again, it depends on the industry. It depends on, whether you need an honors, a master's, or PhD to qualify. So all of those things play a factor. But if you are getting an offer in the region of 250 and above, you are pretty much sitting comfortably where the market is paying graduates. And then another, I think, important thing to consider is the amount of applications that our members process to get through all the graduates who apply for their role. So almost a third of them receive more than 6,000 applications, and the median amount is then at 3,850, which is high. It's massive.
Can I interrupt you for
Yeah,
a second?
sure.
So there's 3,000 applications out there for how many jobs?
So I want to bring it back to the person and
Yeah.
say, where you are applying, you're competing with at least 81 other graduates for one position. So if we look at the room here, there's probably half a person that will get a job if there's about 40 of you. So why this context is important is there are quite a number of the graduates that we've surveyed that apply for 2-3 jobs and they get 2-3 offers, and that is really the exception than the rule. So later on, I'll show you a practical example, but you need to understand who you are competing with. And you need to, if you're making, 5 applications or 5 to 7 applications, you need to understand that it's probably not enough, unless you are the exception. But just know, regardless, you are competing with 81 other people for your position. Okay. I think this is the last one that I want to show on the employer side for now. The other shocking reality is that only 18% of graduates actually make it through to a first round interview, which means you have a CV that is not world class or according to new 2023 trends, etc. Even though you've made your 5 or 7 or 10, 20 applications, you only have an 18% chance of actually making it through to a first round interview. That is shocking. It is scary. So I know that sometimes it's annoying when you upload your resume and then they ask you for the same question and all of those things, and you have to write 20 different motivations why you want to work for this organization. But if you're really serious about being employed after university, then this is the context that needs to be important. So make use of the resources that are available to get your LinkedIn as sharp as what it possibly can be, your CV, and only then you have a 1 out of 5 chance to get an interview. So competition is really tough. Okay. And then the rest of it pretty much, I think that's, if you can at least get to a first interview, your chances of then making it through the process are a lot better. But there's also still quite a high number of graduates who renege on offers, and what that actually means is they accept an offer, but they either don't show up on day one, or they, few days before, they say, sorry, I've gotten something else. So that's quite high from a South African context perspective as well.
And I mean, it happens, right? And a good offer is a good offer. But guys, also just from a professional development perspective, there's ways of going about cancelling an offer or turning things down. So just bear that in mind, because that's going to follow you. All these recruiters talk to each other, and your name comes up and they're like, oh, but they just dumped me. Right? So just remember that you're working in a professional context, and there's ways and means of having conversations around changing contracts or not accepting or showing up.
And the other reality is that you might go onto a grad program, say for company A, you stay there for 2-3 years, you might be on a fixed term contract. In 3 years' time, you have to probably start the process over again. Chances are that you're probably going to go back to company A, and you don't want to burn your bridges. So there are resources available. If you're not sure how to do it, don't want to say the word we're not allowed to say at university, something that starts with chat, but there are resources available on campus that will help you, that will help you write, or at least in a professional way, say thank you, but no thank you, because, the industry is very, very small. Okay. And the next few slides are really the 2,000 odd grads who started on graduate programs at one of our partner organizations, and this is looking at things from their perspective. So a year or two ago, they were probably sitting in seats similar to yours, looking at a similar presentation. So this is just to show that It's not, centered around one or two universities. They come from a large spread of universities or tertiary institutions across South Africa. So it's very well represented in terms of not just being the voice of, say, Western Cape or the North. It's actually quite spread. And then where most of them ended up, you would see about 25% of them ended up in auditing. That's your CA route, and that just goes together with the slide that I spoke around earlier, where most of the vacancies are actually placed, and then followed by ICT, legal, audit, etc. I have made the slide deck available, which we'll share with you afterwards as well. So that's really a spread of where those graduates have been working. And then this is also a very interesting slide. So the timing of their job hunting. More than half of them started thinking about life after university before they got to final year. So if you haven't started thinking about it yet.
Final year.
Yeah. But really it's around understanding, again, back to opportunities, understanding what is available, and do you actually have the minimum criteria or requirements to be eligible to apply, let alone be part of the 18% to get an interview. So you have your name on company A, and you have all your ducks in a row and all of those things, only to realize actually they're looking for 65% and above minimum. Or you need to have at least a minimum of a master's. So have all of those things as research, so that when it comes to the end of your final year, or when you're doing honors, it's not a surprise. You actually know what is required of you, and what you need to do, what steps you need to take from as early on as before university to land with, or to actually be employed. And then these are just some of the factors that they've considered as graduates. I'm only going to read the more than 75%. And again, if this is something that rings true to you when you are deciding where to apply for, things like these factors were important for these grads. So was there, additional training and development available for them? What is the reputation of the organization? And that, again, is, you can find that on social media. You can speak to the many, probably Stellenbosch alumni who work for those organizations via LinkedIn. Are there any long-term career prospects? And I know generally with, this generation, it's slightly different to 10, 20 years ago. But again, if you want to be there for 5 or, plus years, what does it actually look like, and how can you progress? Organizations culture, a very, I think, practical way of understanding how these cultures work is by doing VAC work, by doing internships, doing job shadowing, speaking to people who work for those organizations, so that you can understand what are you getting yourself in for, and does it go together with your strengths, your values, and those sort of things. Security of employment, I think in South Africa, it's major, and there's two aspects to it. It's whether it is, if you are on a fixed term contract, which means you're on a contract and, it might come to an end in a year or two, is there a possibility of you staying on after completing your graduate program? Or what sort of financial status this company has? Are you secured of a position, or will they be going through retrenchments and that sort of thing? So that's important for grads. Of course, corporate responsibility, as well as D&I, or diversity and inclusion. So the others you can obviously go through in your own time. And then, yeah, that's the graduate side, and the rest is really just a practical step of what you can do at university while looking for a job. So do you want me to?
Yeah, I think please, kind of, as it goes through the horse's mouth.
Yeah, so I've written this or depicted this as if we have the luxury of prior to university, but if you're sitting somewhere here, you then need to realize if you're in third year now, you've already graduated, you've got a bit of catching up to do. So really, prior to university, and there's a lot of stats about South African, how we deal with career guidance, career advice, or the lack thereof. But ideally, if it's not easily available to you, the thinking is around your in-depth, the degree, and what are the majors available to you. And that's before you even register or step foot in Stellenbosch. And then from a first year perspective, now you have access to career advisors on campus. You need to start thinking of your top 3 employers, and you also need to find out from your career services or the resources available, who are the top 3 employers that recruit from your class at this particular university, if your faculty is not aware of that information. Tapping into the alumni, honestly, it's probably the best information that you're going to get. Yeah, much better than Google. And then seriously start planning your work experience, which then more relates to VAC work, internships, etc. A lot of companies already offer it at first year level. You don't want to be left behind. From a second year perspective, again, now you're going to start implementing the things that you've planned for in your first year. You're going to review all the information that you've gotten from your career advisors, from Google, from the alumni, all of those things. And very importantly, you need to check for new and emerging trends in your particular field. Some faculties are probably better at talking about this than others, but you do not want to be caught behind, as an example, let's just make us, you're studying something like, I don't know, agriculture or something, and now data has become a massive part of how it works in the agricultural science space. If it's part of your faculty, then fantastic. If it's not, what are you going to do if this is a new and emerging space in your field to actually get with the times? And then have an understanding of the employment opportunities available. That's a very quick search on LinkedIn, on Google, etc., etc. And then in your third year, it really is understanding the entry-level roles. And if you want to work for company A or B, do they have a graduate program? Do they have an internship? Do they have entry-level positions? What is it going to take for you to actually make that step from university into the world of work? And then, of course, you're now using relationships and networks across. Again, it could be the alumni, it could be people from your network, etc. But making use of all the information that you've gathered over the last few years and finding a job. Okay, great.
Nicole, thank you so much. Guys, we're going to just hold on to questions until the end. I'm keeping an eye on the online community as well, and any questions that are coming through there. So thank you so much. I told you the real stuff, right? Those numbers are a little bit unsettling, but it's good to know because information is power, and you are now more armed than you were when you sat down this evening for what the reality is out on the ground. So that's very much the South African context, and I'm so sorry I didn't welcome you by name at the very beginning. So this is Francois. He is from iSprout, and he'll tell you more about them in a moment, but I think it's really important just to kind of go, that's the South African context. We in no way want to, and I think you feel the same, we contribute to any sort of brain drain in South Africa. We need you, we need your brains, we need your talent, we need you to grow this country. But based on the numbers, you need the experience, you need the exposure. Where are you going to get it, and what other opportunities are available to you to be able to get that experience, gain those skills, and then bring them back home? Okay, so that's what Francois is here for this evening, and he's going to tell us a little bit more about iSprout and the opportunities that exist there.
First of all, thank you so much. And yeah, it's a pleasure to be here, and I feel privileged on one side. And I think it's just nice to be here and see people think about potentially an international opportunity, right? So I very much like also the stuff that Sagia is presenting. I saw that already last year. For myself, I'm one of South Africa's biggest supporters, I think. I'm coming here already for 10 years. And I also want to give you a little bit of a perspective how the international employers look at South Africa. So there is definitely also choice to go international, but going international or taking an international career experience is also challenging. And I'll give you a few examples of that, but I would like to put it in that perspective. And I think one of the main reasons that we do, we see it is very important to give back. So if you go international, it doesn't need to be forever. You can do it for a few years. You can decide to come back. You can decide to bring some of the knowledge back. There is options And I think that's a very important element of our strategy. We only focus on South Africans, because we feel there's a good reason for that. So there's definitely hope, also internationally for you guys. Yeah, let me just see how that's, forget that's, is it the top one?
No, you're going to switch it off.
Oh, sorry. Can you help a little bit with?
Just put it back on again and then scroll.
Yeah.
There we go.
Okay, so yeah, maybe not too much about me. This is not about me, but people can relate to. I have an engineering background, and I know this is not only for engineering, but let me give you a few examples of what we try to do. As I said, it's for us. It's not today about iSprout in itself, but I do think it's important to realize indeed that we need to think about going somewhere and giving something back. So the agenda was a little bit today about what is now the challenge for an international experience. I want to tell you a little bit about how international employers look at South Africa, and look at actually the good outlook you have. Why then, of course, one of the choices would be, why the Netherlands? I mean, there's multiple options where you could potentially have an international career. And why would it be the Netherlands in your case? And then some tips and tricks. Let's go to one slide, which I actually like. This is a Dutch couple, and they arrived last Monday in Cape Town from the Netherlands. And they did this for 6 months. So they were for 6 months in a fully electric car. They drove to the whole of Africa and Europe and Africa, and they arrived 6 months later, fully electric charged, and it took them 6 months to get here. Now, the question then is, this is a great international experience, right? They both quit their job, they had some sponsoring, and they drove the whole way back to Cape Town, and they're also going back. But you think it's maybe a nice international experience, but the biggest challenge actually was maybe not driving from Amsterdam to South Africa. Can you imagine if you're 6 months in a relationship, every night in the evening at 6 the light goes down and you're on your own, the two of you, discussing your life and discussing your future every single day. So it's also a relation test. You know, how do you manage such a relationship? So it sounds obvious, but sometimes the challenge is in a very different angle than what you think. And it's also with an international experience. It may sound great. I mean, if you look at the average wage in, South Africa, and you compare that to the legal wage that we have to offer in the Netherlands. So in the Netherlands, we have to offer legally at least a minimum of 800,000 rand a year for a South African, for a fresh graduate, if they're under 30. And now that sounds very promising, but you need to look at it from a different way. Your cost of living is much higher than it is over here. There is so many other aspects you have to take into account. So an international experience, although it might seem a fantastic solution, you really need to think about this. And coming back to what is said on the left side for me, it's planning. You need to think about how you plan this. It's not a quick and dirty choice. So think about that very carefully. Another example is this one. This is the first solar car that is that's at least they went almost in production. You see a yellow license plate. That means it's a Dutch car. But it is actually designed by a South African engineer. And Chris is actually...
From where?
From Stellenbosch.
There we go.
So he's a Stelly. And he's presenting next week. But what I like about his story, he's now for 4.5 years in the Netherlands. He was one of the lead engineers for this car. And his dream was, since he was 6 years old, he wanted to buy and to build a solar car. An amazing experience. Unfortunately, at a certain stage, you need to bring the car in production. And they need like $2 billion or $3 billion to get it there. And that didn't happen. So, although it was his dream, he still could not fulfill all of his challenges. And I think that's something that you need to realize. If you're going to have an international career, there will always be different obstacles than you actually can always anticipate. But an amazing journey, and he will present on this next week. He's now actually working for iSprout, but he's a stelly indeed, and you guys have amazing talent. That's what I want to tell. I want to give you also really a bit of hope, because I think you're actually doing a great job. Europe has realized that it actually needs to be passport agnostic. And maybe not everybody knows, but in Europe there is a huge demand for skilled people. South Africa is one of the youngest nations, if you compare it on average age and demographics. The Netherlands isn't. So there is a lot of people that are retiring, that are close to retiring, and there's actually less people studying and starting to studying. So the demand is big, the supply is low, so there will be shortage for the next 10 or 20 years in skilled people. And we realize that. As a country, the Netherlands is a very small country if you compare it to South Africa, but we realize that we cannot do it all by ourselves. And of course then, we need to look at where do all these people come from? And I know the group is not all engineering today, because we're also, by the way, we're doing engineers and also financial people. But it's good to realize that 75% of all, for example, engineering people, engineering graduates, by 2030 already originate from the BRICS countries. South Africa is one of them, right? So, and you can be, I know it's a bit of a sensitive topic, but still, it's good to realize that a lot of the talent and the pool of talent, like yourselves, is in this area. So please be hopeful. There is hope for you guys, definitely. And I think this is maybe also a very sensitive slide, but the reason why we are focusing, for example, as a Dutch employer, on you guys, if you compare all those BRICS countries, so if you know that 75% is coming from those BRICS countries, and we need to focus on them, then there is a few things where really I think South Africa stands out. And one of the things is the rankings of the universities. Let me take that one out. Of course, there is a high unemployment. Unemployment, that's a sensitive topic, but still, it means that people are typically have a high mobility. They want to create a better future for themselves. So from an international perspective, we see that as, you know, an indicator that people would like to potentially move. But for me, the most important reason is the quality of your education. If you look at UCT, if you look at yourselves, if you look at Pretoria, there is so much talent out there. And I think also internationally, we see that as a very high level education. So that's one of the reasons why we actually took a decision just to focus on South Africa, because we believe in the relationships with yourselves, with the universities, and we need to understand the people that are coming there in a few years, like yourselves. And we want to understand what people are coming. So yeah, this is very strange, but from an international perspective, you're actually very well positioned with your talent. Yeah, I mentioned this already. If you look at some of the rankings, I don't need to tell you that, but I'm actually coming from the higher education world. If you look at some of those rankings, and they differ a little bit on what ranking you look, but for a vice chancellor, and most probably at Stellenbosch and at UCT, they all live by the rankings. And it's important. People look at that. We look at that. You know, Europe looks at that. So I think you make an excellent choice, and this is also very dependent on what subject you're in and what area you're in. I mean, accountants as well. You mentioned financial people are typically having a reasonably good outlook. They're dying for accountants in the Netherlands as well. But again, you need to think about what would you like to get out of such an experience. Another few examples where how we actually look at South Africa. There is no time zone difference, right? So It's the same time now in Amsterdam than it is over here. And there's research actually written on this. If you go abroad, it is actually very important that you can relate back to your family and that you can actually talk to them, that you are in the same time zone. And there's quite a bit of research done on that, and that's helpful. There is a culture fit. You guys, have amazing work ethics, and that's how it's actually really generally perceived in the Netherlands. There's a language fit. Of course, there's a certain history between the countries, which there is a certain advantage. Why not use that advantage in your favor? And I think what I personally like a lot in South Africa, there is a certain resilience and there is a personal drive to succeed. If you go to the Netherlands, I was very lucky that I could do a master. In South Africa, it's not almost common. I think you have a 30% rate of going from a bachelor to a master. In the Netherlands, it's maybe 70 or 80%. People don't realize that. So you are much more driven. Sorry to say that about some of the people in my own country, but you want to succeed. And I think that's the main message you're also bringing today. If you start planning that, that's a very important remark I typically want to see. Let me just skip a few slides. Then, of course, the other way around would be, how does an employer look at South Africa? Why could you potentially look at the Netherlands? There's a few reasons here. I'll not go into detail right now, but the Netherlands, I think, is a very nice gateway to Europe. If you also want to look at other things than only earning money, right? You want to personally develop. You want to see things in the world. You want to experience stuff. It makes you a better person. It makes you a richer person. And development is also something that people and employers will look at when they hire you. They will not look purely at a resume and then purely at your grades. They will look at how rounded is a person. What skill set does the person have? Has the person a certain experience? That's very important in what you need to do. Let's skip all of this. I'll skip this as well. Oh, maybe one question about the Netherlands then, maybe one question. Load shedding.
Dum, dum, dum.
Very sensitive topic. Do you know what the average downtime? Who knows what the average downtime is per household, per year in the Netherlands? Any clue? Is it less than 1 hour? Is it 10 hours? Is it 100 hours? Or is it 1,000 hours? Per year, eh? Less than an hour? Okay, you won. It's indeed 17 minutes for a full year. But also this is not to, I don't want to make a point now you're doing bad. I want to say you, also in the Netherlands, we now have an enormous issue. If you, for example, look at the Netherlands, we now have a great grid and there's almost no outage. But I showed you this electric car in the beginning, right, of the couple. If everybody would start driving electric in Europe, one electric car resembles 10 households. The grid cannot even take it anymore. So in the Netherlands as well, we have huge issues in building a better grid and a more sustainable grid. So be relaxed. I mean, South Africa, I know, has challenges, but the Netherlands also will have challenges. And that's my point as well. If you go abroad, you should not go abroad because you miss or don't like things in South Africa, because there will definitely also be challenges in the Netherlands. And there will be issues in the Netherlands as well. So think about why you should do this. This is, for example, one of our clients. And they are indeed, which is the Dutch Eskom. And they're open to engineers from South Africa. but they also want to make sure that they really succeed, that there is a certain retention. And they also want to promote that after a few years you could actually go back. Yeah, so my main point, it's a little bit, I always make that resemblance with, you know, if you're an Olympian, and actually Simon is in the back, he's one of our guys working in South Africa, former Olympian swimmer. You cannot win a gold medal at an Olympic game if you start planning that 2 months before the Olympic Games. You need to think about it right now. What can I do today to think about how can I position myself for either the South African market or an international market, because it's not necessarily different, but you need to think about that. And then a few tips and tricks which I would like to give you if you think about going international. You know, have that plan. Make sure you plan it in advance. Think about international experience or working experience in South Africa. It will help. Do not only look at the pay. I made that point about payment, but the career, your career is a result of taking the right decisions, not from taking the higher money in the beginning. You should just make a good career, and then the money will follow from that. Because in the Netherlands, there's very different standards. Housing is much more expensive, cost of living is much more expensive. You should do the math. Yeah, and there's a few things where you really need to look at. Financial responsibility, housing, due diligence. You need to talk to other stellies or people that studied here. How are they perceiving a certain country? So again, we're very open to discuss people that want to make such an experience. And I think it could really be an option for you to do these things. But don't see it as a holy grail and that it's only better outside of South Africa, because there is definitely challenges everywhere. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think a lot to think about. Thank you so much to both of our guests. We have a few comments online, and I'm going to quickly go through those, and then we'll open up to the floor if you've got any questions following that, all right? So first of all, Henu asks, something that I'm very curious about is how useful is it to do online certification to add to one's CV? So, for example, he is an industrial engineer doing masters and is considering using online courses to get certified on SAP, for example. The feedback from the rest of the online community is like, go for it, do it, it's a good thing. Consensus on the room?
I don't think there's anything like bad about doing, you know, additional certifications and things. But again, back to my point around new and emerging, you know, what is relevant. And also, again, speaking to alumni, speaking to people working for the organization, what has helped them become more marketable and more specialized in their fields. But yeah, it's a yes.
And then, Francois, a question for you is, what is the work culture like in the Netherlands? Work culture?
It's of course dependent a bit on who you ask and how you look at it. But I think in general there's a very good work-life balance, working culture is a bit different than here in the sense that not that really different. I mean, it's just a good working culture. There's a good work-life balance. There's typically what I've seen, for example, from the Sagia presentation last year. Also here you see that money is not the only benefit. People are looking more and more for different things that make a job relevant to them. Is hybrid working possible? Is it, you know, is there a health subscription? Can you have a sports? There's so many things you can work at, and I think that's where the Netherlands is now looking at. They're trying to not only look at the money side, they're looking at a package of benefits. And I think that's not different than in South Africa. The package needs to be in order, and that's what you see a lot of companies trying to work towards, having that right package. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, there's quite a bit of interest in the Netherlands online
Yeah.
here. Are there opportunities to work both in South Africa and the Netherlands, for example, 6 months here, 6 months there?
Whew.
What is the duration of that sort of exchange?
I'm still
thinking?
trying to figure that out. 6 months here, 6 months there. Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, there's a simple thing. We have now a class of 6 people starting in January, 6 South Africans for the Dutch ASCOM, but it's in January. And they need to go to work on their bicycle. And it's 0 degrees, So yeah, there is options for hybrid, but that typically is not from the start. It starts when you're working with a client and you get to know them a little bit, then you potentially can think about things. One of the things that we do, which we feel helps, also for an employer, I mean, if you would get to the Netherlands and you leave everything behind, nobody is helped if after half a year you get homesick and you want to go back and everybody is disappointed. So what we try to do at least, I think, is, sending you back home for Christmas and buy that ticket for you and enjoy your people and enjoy your family at home, because it will energize the moment when you go back. So hybrid working is starting to pop up. It's becoming more popular, but typically not immediately from the start. Make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Then we seem to have a few agricultural science students in the room. How big is the agricultural industry or career opportunity in the Netherlands?
Good question. I mean, there is a big university in the Netherlands, the #1 in the world, in Wageningen. I'm not sure if you heard about that place. So agricultural is big, but the Netherlands typically is an export country. So they export a lot of their agricultural knowledge into the world. Yes, there is agricultural engineers definitely have room in the Netherlands, but not necessarily more than maybe South Africa, because I think agri-tech here is, for example, of very big importance, right? So I think you should think about where to do that. Stellenbosch is good at agricultural science, so I think about what you want to do in that area, and then reverse engineer what you all need. I think that's basically what she was saying as well. I mean, think about where you want to go and then reverse engineer what courses you should do. If you should do an international experience in the Netherlands, if you do a training in the Netherlands or online, that's all dependent on where you want to go.
All right, so there are a lot of Netherlands-related job questions online. And just to give the folks in the room a bit of opportunity before we run out of time, I'd just like to direct everyone, actually, but especially the folks that are currently online, is to follow iSprout on LinkedIn, go to your website, and you can engage with questions there. If we have time towards the end of the session, we can loop back to Netherlands-specific online questions. But in the meantime, I'd like to go to the room and see if we've got any questions. Right in front, please.
All right.
Hello. Hi, everybody. My name is Kofi Annan. So I have a question. It's for both of you, actually. In terms of what are the employers' insights for people who are perhaps looking to reinvent themselves? Because from the data that we've seen, it seems to favor people who started really early, who are highly specialized and very focused in one space. And then maybe here and there you do a certification to, acquire additional skills. But say if you wanted to make like an entire career switch, what would that look like? And so you wouldn't be like a fresh graduate.
I don't know where exactly where the research and things are sort of, based on. So I think for me, what you study, unless you're, of course, a medical doctor, that would help if you have an MBCHB. But what you study at university doesn't always have a direct link to where you actually end up. So a lot of organizations have started looking more around the out of classroom skills or the professional skills, as opposed to, having a a formal qualification, but again, it depends on the organization. I think the important thing for graduates is to build those skills regardless of what they've studied and where they end up. We talk about the 4 Cs, the World Economic Forum, they bring about research every couple of years that specifically talks to skills of the future. So I think if you are more focused on building those skills, it will make you more almost adaptable, where you can pivot easier because you're not just focused on one thing. But again, technical skills can be taught. You can go for a course, you can do a certification, you can do all of those things throughout your university career, or even when you start working. Again, it depends on the organization and what other skills you've built up other than technical skills.
I can actually relate to that quite well. There's one client that we were just discussing, which is the Dutch Eskom, basically. They've let go of, for example, exactly should I have an electrical engineer or a mechanical engineer, or the job that they have at hand as a project engineer is much more about project management. So they want analytical thinking skills, but they see people that have done a mechanical or electrical engineering degree. They know that people have these skills. But for them, then there's a different skill set asked, how to manage stakeholders and do a bit of management. And so it is really dependent on the job. And sometimes it is a bit different than the hardcore skills. There is companies in the Netherlands as well where they want hardcore mechanical, for example, or financial people with CAs that done their articles and in different areas. But there is sometimes room for shifts. It's also your personality that counts, right? And what kind of skills do you have? Yeah. So chase your dream. That's important. Yeah. Be good at it. Yeah.
One at the back.
Hi, good evening. My name's Philip. I work as a career coach based in Stellenbosch, and I've had many interesting conversations with students on campus lately. One thing that always comes to the fore quite quickly is that the engineering stream and anything around BCom or accounting is quite well serviced. I mean, you've got companies coming in from the first day of class, pandering to students, and as your research shows, about 76% of the successful graduates come of those 2 faculties. So, for the remaining 24% of people, do you think there's any responsibility from the university side to try to engage more employers to speak to students? Because you've mapped out a very nice process for any student to follow. But in my experience discussing with students, there aren't any companies coming in to speak to the humanities faculty or education or science or anything outside of the accounting and engineering fields. And a lot of our discussion tonight has centered around those 2. But what would this conversation look like if you removed engineering and accounting from that? Because that, I think, is where there's a big gap for a lot of people sitting here. Thanks.
I think it goes back to your alumni and where they are and what resource you can get from them as well. Because I could imagine if none of your humanities students weren't getting jobs, you wouldn't have a BA or humanities faculty. So there's still a particular need for that. I think it's twofold. It's not just on the responsibility of the university, but also on the responsibility of the student, and back to why did I choose this field? What are my aspirations, and where am I actually going to end up after that? We've also had some very interesting conversations with science students that, they come into the university space, they enjoyed physics and, that sort of thing at high school. And then you think that you're going to leave with an undergrad and be a scientist. So it is around the responsibility that all of us have, not just to rely on the university for this type of information, but also to educate ourselves and say, if I want to be, as an example, a data scientist, I would probably need a master's or PhD. And I think there's an onus on both parties. Back to that.
Yeah, there's maybe one thing I can think of. I was mentioning about the South African guy that built the solar car. One of the things that we would like to discuss with some of the universities here and this is still something we want to plan, is this company that he worked for started as a student team. And basically they had, some of them had engineering background, but the whole company suddenly was 800 people, and it started from that. And they had a student challenge. I mean, it could be a solar challenge, it could be an agri-tech challenge, it could be, but it's not enough then to have only engineers in that group. So they typically look for a multidisciplinary approach. There was a person in there with a more marketing or business background. There was a pure scientist in there. There was so having a more rounded group of people trying to actually use a technology, win a challenge, and maybe start a small startup company from that. I think that is very rewarding. It's a concept I use quite a bit in the Dutch universities, and I would like to, again, this is a little bit, we did not discuss this yet, but this is definitely something I would like to test, and this is also a thing that Chris wants to discuss with the Stellenbosch University, because I think there is, you see actually you develop skills which are not necessarily directly, which are directly in your field. That could be an option, but yeah.
Yeah. I think the point you raise is a really important one. I'm a fundraiser in the Development and Alumni Relations Division, and so I've got companies coming to me wanting to sponsor students, and I just don't have enough engineers and commerce students to meet their desires. And then the question is, well, what about everybody else? And I think one of the things that have come up from both our speakers and who's hosting you here this evening is connection with alumni. It's connection with people that are in the market, that have walked the path you've been. They've been through the Stellenbosch process. They've learned a lot. They've also learned a lot about themselves, where their shortcomings are, what their experience has not maybe provided them with. They kind of go, oh, you know, could really do with more X in the space. So having that connection with the alumni network is really, really important. And I do think that we should all encourage as many potential employers, regardless of the field, to come and engage with our students, to expose them to what is out there, but also to expose the employers to, actually, you know what, I don't need an engineer, I just really need a good philosophy student to help me think through this. You know, I don't need them to build the car, I need them to think about it and how that's going to work. You know, I know it sounds silly, but it's very true. As Francois said, it's not just a whole bunch of engineers that do a thing. Everything's in a multidisciplinary space, and I think a couple of things that are really, really important, aside from the alumni network and that connectivity that has come out here today. But I think what you can see is, a degree is not enough, or a degree is not enough to make yourself the most marketable in our current context. And also, it's not just about the degree. It's about you as a person, what you've learned, the agency you take for yourself and your situation and where you want to go and where you see yourself. I think that's really important. So just to kind of agree and reiterate that I know the challenge in the space, particularly on campus, and that it is so important that we give as much exposure to both our students and the marketplace about the talent that exists here. Any more questions?
Hello, everyone. My name is Simtembile. I'm going to direct my question on vacation work. I've seen that most of the requirements say that they want like 65% for financial accounting, management accounting, or maybe they want the academic records from first year and then until my third year. But then at the very same time, on my first year, I didn't do that well. So that closes a lot of doors for me to do the vacation work. Is there any way around that? Because I believe it really can't be academics all the time. There should be other aspects to consider.
Yeah, it's something that we talk about constantly with our employer partners. You had a question earlier on for me, how many graduates versus... So not too long ago, I was looking at the stats, very rough, that for at the end of every year in South Africa, we exit anything between 110 to 130,000 graduates across all universities, and there's only about 6,000 to 8,000 positions available. So South African employers have used the 65% as a cutoff, because if you're looking at 3,850 CVs and you only have 10 or 20 positions, it's impossible to do 3,850 interviews. What I've helped graduates in my experience is you need to understand, you need to be able to tell the story of why you didn't do well in first year. You need to be able to own that story, because in that lies a lot of resilience and grit. So unfortunately, your transcript is what it is, but you need to be able to narrate that when you come across an employer. And if you're not making it through the traditional channels, which is, applying and then a bot or AI actually says 65% you're out, make alternative connections. Do it through LinkedIn. Do it through your alumni network. Is there another way that you can, get a foot in the door? But internships really have a very high conversion rate. So if you've done very well in internship or VAC work, chances of you being offered a job to be on the graduate program is very good. But own your story, own your narrative. Okay.
Anyone else? One at the back. I just want to say that one thing that our online community might not be aware of, we have Kathy Sims, who's the Executive Director for SIGIA, who was only able to join us online, but she's also handling a lot of the questions online and answering students. So just to contextualize Kathy for the online environment, and if you're going to go back and look at the video again, if you've missed some stats or whatever, Kathy really is quite the expert in her space, as is Nicole, and so you're getting some really good advice online as well. So go for it.
Okay. Good evening. I have a question for you, sir. We have this term that we find, or at least I've found over the years, where companies like to throw in the word diversity, but they don't always explain to us, what it means. So I will say, as a graduate and someone who's going to graduate again, my concerns when going somewhere, especially overseas, it's, how safe am I since I'm a woman? And also, what's the integration like in terms of race? How well integrated are people of color and Black people in the Netherlands? Is language not too much of a barrier? I don't have any Afrikaans background, so, I only speak English. What would that look like?
A very good question. So I think also in the Netherlands, I think if you look at the Netherlands in general, it's sometimes dependent on the client that you work with. For example, if you take the Dutch Eskom, they're traditionally a very white company, right? But they now at the board level took the decision, like, we want to have diversity. We want to actually include South African people. They're very much open to female engineers, for example. So I think it's now really on the agenda, the board agenda of many of the companies. Does it always happen like that? It takes a bit of time, but I would definitely, and also if you research that a little bit, I think the Netherlands is actually quite, open country right now and very liberal in that sense. So I do think it's definitely something you should not shy away from. If you feel that's something you want to do, think about that. But again, it's up to you how you motivate that and making sure you are the right candidate. Quality is the most important aspect, definitely. Should be. Yeah.
Anyone else in the room? Okay. Yeah, so online, as I said, Kathy is handling most of the queries, but there are a lot of questions around sort of, is it worth, and I suppose it's very sector or discipline specific, but how valuable is it to do a PhD? Is there a massive difference in sort of your entry point, whether you've got an undergraduate, honors, master's, PhD? Any thoughts on that?
I definitely think it's sector specific. So if you look at things like the sciences, it's probably more advisable to have someone with a PhD than, an undergrad, etc. And then there's also the point that you need to weigh up, when are you going to exit university? So for some, funding is a huge reality. As you would know, that's your world. And again, I think it comes back to your research. Speak to the alumni, or speak to, if you get to an HR interview, etc. Is there a big percentage of the cohort that they require to have PhDs or masters, etc.? I really think it's sector specific.
And I suppose it also determines what you want to do.
Yeah, correct.
Do you need a PhD to do X? Is a master sufficient? Is an honours sufficient?
Yeah, I think we also, especially in one of the projects, I work specifically around math and math-based, postgrads, etc., and where we are as a country. That particular PhD at the moment is probably much better used in an academic environment as opposed to in the corporate environment, until we get to a point where we can broaden the math pipeline, because it's an entry for most degrees. So I guess in that instance, I would probably not want to step on the academic toes and say, stay in the math space. But if it's something else, exit at an honours or master's.
I think if there aren't any more questions in the room, thank you all so much for joining us. I think I'd like to very sincerely thank both of our guests this evening. I think it's been really, really interesting. It's been very grounded in reality and what's happening in the markets, and that there's hope in South Africa. The grass isn't always greener on the other side, but at the end of the day, it's about knowing yourself, or if you don't know yourself, finding out a bit more about yourself and deciding what you want to be, and doing the research as to where that is going to go. So I think we can give our guests a round of applause, yeah? So much. And then those of you who want to stick around and ask a few more questions, Francois, Nicole, Simon at the back is all here. And thank you all so much for the evening. And you can also join us for a glass of wine in the bar area if you wish.